The Revelation File News Forum and News Report is a production of Wally Wood Ministries, and we often start our program with this disclaimer for the sake of our service providers online that we do use copyrighted material such as videos and other material, and this is for education and information purposes, utilizing the free use doctrine, the fair use doctrine of the copyright and fair use imagery. And we do receive free will offerings into this ministry, but we do not do this for any financial purposes at all. So we thank you for being tuned in, and we welcome you back to this edition of the Revelation File Report. I'm Wally Wood. Today we're going to talk about oil in Israel. We've talked about this before in programs number 13 and 14. And we invite you to go back and review those shows because I take you into much deeper detail there. Today is merely an update on the fact that oil and gas is being discovered in Israel, and Israel is moving in the direction of which they've long been prophesied, that they would become a major producer in this area of energy. And now the nations are coming to Israel for exports of oil and gas. So today's update should intrigue you to a great deal. Some of the headlines. The Jerusalem Post. Oil, gas discovered off Tel Aviv coastline. The Investor Place newsletter for investors. Could major discovery make Israel the next energy giant? FoxNews.com. Potentially game-changing oil reserves discovered in Israel. The Economist. Black gold under the Golan. And to the left, you see a map of the Mediterranean area off the coastline of Israel and the number of oil companies and drilling sites in the Mediterranean. And they're about to move into major oil production onshore as well. So these are the latest headlines, and we take you into some videos, some news videos now.
Exploration companies which have been drilling in the new field say it has at least 4.8 trillion cubic meters of gas worth tens of billions of dollars. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the find will be a huge boost to the country's economy.
This
is a day in which we hear about a huge whale of gas, in which we are about to pass the dual-year budget for the second time, in which it is announced that the Israeli economy has grown faster than almost any other economy in the West and created 100,000 workplaces for Israelis. It is a day for great optimism for the coming year, and everyone should be optimistic.
Israel currently imports most of its energy requirements. With this new find, energy officials say it will be able to export excess energy around the world.
The Leviathan 1 discovery is a very significant one. It is the largest natural gas offshore discovery in the world in the last decades. And obviously, talking about the state of Israel, which just started the natural gas industry, it's even more significant because that could be the foundation for an export project of natural gas from the state of Israel, either to Europe or to Asia.
US experts have known for some time that there are huge deposits of natural gas in the eastern Mediterranean. The Israeli announcement could compel other countries like Lebanon, Syria and Cyprus to start their own exploration projects. However, some Israeli commentators are already warning that the new field will be costly to develop and require huge investment for pipelines and other equipment. Anand Naidu, Al Jazeera.
It's a running joke here in Israel. Moses led the Jews through the desert for 40 years to the only place in the Middle East with no oil and no gas. So for all its 65 years, Israel has been almost totally dependent on fuel imports for energy. Costly and precarious for a nation surrounded by often hostile neighbors. But now that's all changing. Israel has at last discovered so much natural gas, it's heading towards energy independence, a gas exporter in just a few years. 56 miles off Israel's Mediterranean coast, the Tamar Reservoir started flowing earlier this year, with enough gas to supply Israel for decades. Another field nearby, almost twice as big, should be pumping in 3 to 4 years. Israel believes both fields lie well within its maritime borders, though the Lebanese government has challenged that. The stakes are high because there are also reports of huge oil deposits near the very same gas fields. Some call these new discoveries an economic miracle.
Amazing story.
And that joke about Moses?
We proved that joke to be wrong. There's dual pipeline, 16-inch pipeline.
It all began with Gidon Tadmor and his small Israeli company, which began drilling for oil and gas onshore in 1991.
Obviously, we needed luck and God's help. We needed the resources to be underground. But I think that the unique contribution that we were able to bring is the human spirits and the belief.
Tadmor, a lawyer by training, also needed partners with drilling experience willing to invest millions. He had a hunch there was gas in Israeli waters because Egypt had found some nearby, and he sought investment from the Texas oil giants. But he says nobody bit, afraid, Tadmor believed, of upsetting their much bigger customers, the Arabs. Finally, a small Texas company with no Arab clients, today called Noble Energy, agreed to invest in the Israeli dream.
Started the energy industry here in Israel.
It was a completely new industry here, is that correct?
That's correct.
You literally helped found it from nothing.
That's correct.
There it is, Tamar gas. Look.
Gas began flowing through the Tamar platform in March. It should soon be able to generate most of Israel's electricity, instead of relying on costly imports of coal, diesel, and heavy fuel oil.
We estimate that in fuel savings alone to the power plants that go right to the consumer, that over the life of Tamar, Israel will save over $100 billion in fuel savings.
It took considerable engineering to get at the gas. 5 wells were drilled, some more than 3 miles below the seabed, in waters too deep for a production platform. So pipes were laid to shallower waters more than 90 miles away, the longest so-called tieback in the world. The platform and base were built in Texas and transported more than 8,000 miles to the Mediterranean, where the base was plunged into the sea and the platform placed on top. From conception to operation, just over 4 years.
This is a gigantic place. The Tamar platform weighs 34,000 tons. It's 290 meters high, and 50 people work here round the clock. This is where it's coming in. That's correct.
On the platform, water and humidity are separated from the gas. It then comes onshore here, is filtered again, and is fed to multiple power stations, which convert it into electricity to feed Israel's electric grid. It's already helping the environment. Today, 40% of Israel's electricity is fueled by gas. It's much cheaper and much cleaner than oil.
We've saved the country 17 million metric tons of CO2 emissions.
What does that mean?
That's the equivalent of taking all the cars in Israel off the road for over a year. So it's a big thing.
The biggest benefit, a huge boost to Israel's economy. Gas will add 1% to Israel's GDP this year, and that's triggered a debate here.
What will Israel do with its financial windfall? The key question, will energy independence make Israel stronger, and how?
It's a red-hot topic in a country that already spends 20% of its budget on defense, far more than other Western nations. Critics worry that protecting the new platforms, sitting ducks at sea, will mean even more money is diverted from domestic spending to defense, and they say that's a bad idea. There have also been protests about the government's plan to export much of the gas. The government says that will generate billions in new revenues. But critics say the government acted without necessary parliamentary approval, and they're challenging the plan in court. Lawmakers like Tamar Zandberg say more gas should be kept at home and more of the gas revenues should be invested in domestic programs other than defense.
There is an economic and a social threat, and poverty is a bigger threat than security right now to Israel. The prices are going up, salaries are going down, and social services like, for example, housing are being neglected. We should build a more viable and a more sustainable economy. And this is something that the natural gas can truly help doing, but it takes patience.
And there's another aspect to this story. How will Israel's gas find affect the always volatile politics of the region? That's a concern because the gas basin is believed to extend into waters off Syria and Lebanon, both technically at war with Israel. and Israel's maritime border with Lebanon is in dispute. Michael Levy, an expert on natural gas and energy security at the Council on Foreign Relations, sees both opportunities and risks in the gas discoveries. He worries that maritime border disputes could erupt.
If you disagree about where your borders are and you both claim areas as your own, if something valuable is discovered there, you're going to have some conflict, at least diplomatic, over who gets to develop the wealth of that area.
But he also sees opportunities.
Now we're looking at Israeli exports into the Palestinian territories and into Jordan. That will intensify the economic relationship between those parties. And on top of all that, you'll see discussions about new trade relationships. For example, will Israel be able to strike up trade arrangements with Turkey?
Better Israeli-Arab relations? Inshallah, they say in Arabic. Bezrat Hashem in Hebrew, with God's help. But whatever happens, gas and oil will make Israel a wealthier country, less reliant on others. And that's no joking matter.
Texan entrepreneur John Brown has just one dream: to strike oil in Israel. And it's more than just a business scheme. As a self-proclaimed Christian Zionist, John sees it as his divine mission to show that the Holy Land is positively floating on huge reserves of crude.
The search began for oil in Israel based on the scriptures. In Jacob, in Genesis chapter 41, he spoke of Joseph's land being blessed, and he also spoke of the deep that lies beneath.
Armed with this proof, John succeeded in raising $21 million to set up the Zion Oil Company, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. The plan is to dig down more than 5,000 meters and help the Jewish state become energy independent.
Theology actually confirming the geology. We have seismic and scientific evidence to back up what we're doing. Yeah, we have plenty of that.
That's just as well, because a day's drilling costs the business between $30,000 and $50,000. And Zion Oil aren't the only ones prospecting around here. In the Dead Sea Basin, another company have found a small deposit 2,000 meters down.
According to the evangelistic opinion, in the Dead Sea Basin also there are huge reservoirs of oil. But we are working only on a basis of a scientific basis. Of course, in order to explore oil, you must be an optimistic person.
Finds like this, as well as the recent discovery of large reserves of natural gas off the Israeli coast, only confirm John Brown's suspicions.
I just couldn't imagine God giving Israel anything less than what the Arabs have.
From the Independent.com in England, we read, Israel has a surplus of oil, but with the political stakes high, leaders grapple with how to play it. We have a surplus of oil, Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz said in an interview. Israel's waters are swimming in gas, he says, and what we have discovered is only the beginning, end of quote. Noble Energy, a Houston-based company that made its first discovery of gas in Israel in 1999, has found more than, get this, 30 trillion cubic feet of gas off the country's coast over the past decade. Some experts say new discoveries could double that. That's interesting. The New York Times follows with a report in 2019, Israel's energy dilemma, more natural gas than it can use or export. From Tel Aviv, for decades, Israel was an energy-starved country surrounded by hostile, oil-rich neighbors. Now, it has a different problem. Thanks to major offshore discoveries over the last decade, it's more natural gas than it can use or readily export. To give you a background into why we are interested in this is because it's based and founded in ancient Bible prophecies that go all the way back to Genesis chapter 49. Reading from that chapter, Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Make note of that. Verse 20, Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Deuteronomy chapter 33 goes on to say, And this is the blessing by which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. Verse 24, of Asher he said, let Asher be blessed with children, let him be acceptable to his brethren, and let him dip his foot in oil. Verse 25, thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. Now speaking in terms of the last days, he will dip his foot in oil. And if you look at the map on the screen, you see that Asher is indeed shaped like a foot pointing down. Its toe is at Caesarea. Its heel is at Haifa. And his shoes will be iron and brass. Any possibility of that being pipeline above ground? Well, let's take another look. Remember what Deuteronomy 33:24 said, let Asher be blessed with children. In 1 Chronicles 7, verse 30, we're told that Asher had 4 sons and 1 daughter. From them came 36 offspring listed, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Of interest, the meaning of every one of these 36 names addresses the future of Israel's search for oil in the last days. Now, we took you into the deeper area of all these names in one of our earlier programs on this subject. And we invite you to, again, go back and review that show, because I think you'll find it fascinating that God included in the names of these children a correlation, a connection with energy, oil exploration in the last days. I think you'll find it very, very intriguing. But for our purposes here, we're going to look at 1 Chronicles 7, verse 31. And we read the sons of Beriah, Asher's 4th son, being Eber, and Malchiel, who is the father of Berzavith. Catch this. Beriah, meaning a bar or shaft, to cause to go through hastily. That's what his name means. Eber means to be united or band together in fellowship, a company or association of companies of joint business. Malchiel, God is king, anointed by God for a kingdom rule or dominion. And the 4th child named Bizraith, the great-grandson. His name means to bore or pierce. It's connected to iron. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. For instance, the story translation of these 4 names in that paragraph reads accordingly. The oil will be made to pass hastily through shafts or pipes. These shafts will be drilled in the company of different groups into a joint venture with singleness of mind and intent. God is king, and with this oil he will anoint Israel for her coming kingly rule. These wells will be pierced or cut through with a cutting tool through the earth, such as a drilling bit. Now that's what that paragraph translates into and tells the story behind those 4 names in that listing. The discovery of major oil and gas in Israel, leading this confine of companies, is Zion Oil and Gas of Dallas. They're calling it the Joseph Project. This is the one company of all of them that is involved in its pursuit of oil and gas in Israel based on the Bible, these very scriptures that I'm sharing with you now. And there's a whole collection of prophecies that run from Jacob to Moses, and it's all now been brought to the forefront with Zion Oil and Gas in Dallas. I would invite you to go to their website, zionoil.com, and see how you can get involved and keep them in your prayers. Because again, this is a Christian run and operated oil company. And you saw the brief story of John Brown in the 3rd video that was shown earlier, and his quest to bless Israel with oil. Now, my connection to all this goes all the way back to the early 80s. I was, at that time, the national spokesman for the Asher oil drilling project here in Houston. And it was run by the Energy Exploration Company of Houston. And its president and CEO was Andy Sorrell. And he was the first to go to Israel and map out the fact that there was oil under the ground, deep underground, in that nation, better than 5,000 feet deep. And every day we gave progress reports of that project on national radio. And I was the voice of the Asher Project. So my connection with this goes way back to those early days in the 80s. And it's been fascinating and exhilarating to see how this has now moved progressively in the direction of fulfilling end-time Bible prophecy concerning the wealth of Israel in the last days. A press release recently put forth by the Zion Oil and Gas reads, Zion Oil and Gas receives new oil and gas exploration license agreement from Israel. Zion drilling crew works to finish rig assembly at drill site for inspections. And this comes forth out of Caesarea. And please notice the map on your right. And shows the area where this new license has been granted, or this renewed license, I should say, in the northern sector of the nation of Israel. Now, what makes this significant, especially in the area of our present interest having to do with end-time prophecy, returning to Genesis 49, I want to read to you verse 1. Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which will befall you in the last days. Verse 13, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be a haven of ships. Verse 14, Issachar is strong and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Verse 20, Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Now, the map on the left shows you by arrows where the field of Zebulun and Issachar tribes were drawn. The prophecy says that they will be a haven for ships. But please note, they're nowhere in the vicinity of the coastline. So how are they going to be a haven of ships? The scriptures go on to tell us, and of course I'll show you on the right, again, Zebulun and Issachar, far inland from the coastline. Of note, this particular passage having to do with Issachar being strong and bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant unto tribute. Speaking in terms, excuse me, of the men who work the pipeline and work the oil drill. They are strong men. And these are matters that have been brought forth into Scripture. And when you look at Genesis 49, verse 13, in the next slide, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea. He shall be a haven for ships. Deuteronomy 33:18. And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, and Issachar, verse 19, they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. That's a description of pumping oil, drilling, pumping oil. Zebulun and Issachar are going to do that. Genesis 49:26, the blessings shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Now we have in the map on the left the depiction of a face, the profile of a face on the left side, looking toward the sea, wearing a high-crested crown. These four territories, you have Ephraim in the face, Manasseh in the head of the crown, and Zebulun and Issachar at the apex of that crown. His head, that of Joseph, is going to be anointed with oil coming from the north and covering down through the head. You see the outline of the foot of Asher. He shall dip his foot in oil. So that entire region involving the crown on the top of the head of Joseph will be the area of oil production. Somehow, Zebulun and Issachar, both deep inland from the sea, will suck or pump treasures out of the sea and sand, refineries, and these treasures would create a haven for ships. The head or the crown of Joseph would be anointed or blessed with these treasures. I make note of the fact that Haifa, which is at the heel of Asher, is a port. That's where the ships come in. So it's very easy to see how this entire area is going to be highly operational in the production of oil, including pipeline, and the ships will come into port at Haifa to receive that oil and take it forth. It's also interesting to note that in Genesis 49, in the first verse, I think it is, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Now that may seem archaic to you, but when you look at it from an interpretive perspective, Joseph, speaking of this entire region of which we're talking about, is a bough, a fruitful bough, a tree that's producing much fruit, and this tree sits on top of a well, and the well is deep. Its roots run down into the depth of that well. The branches of this tree run over the wall. Well, the wall represents the boundary of the field in which that tree is placed and found. For its branches to run over the wall, its fruit is available beyond the wall.
You have been watching the Revelation File Report with Wally Wood, a Wally Wood Ministries production from Houston, Texas. You are able to support the ministry by donating at wallywoodministries.com and by mail at Wally Wood Ministries, P.O. Box 42005, Houston, Texas 77242. Wally is available to present full 2-hour forums in your city called the Revelation File News Forum. For more details, contact Andy Valadez at 713-560-3348 or by email at andy@andyvaladez.com. The Revelation File News Report is a weekly update of global trends in the news as it aligns with end-time Bible prophecy. Tune in again next time and be sure to like and share this channel.